Hello everyone, welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, the tide of battle shifted once again with Rimuru's arrival. Rimuru single-handedly restored Feldway, who had been shattered to the point of soul dispersal by the Star King Dragon, Veldanava. At the same time, Veldora and Milim were still struggling desperately against Ivarage, stubbornly insisting they had not lost, though it was obvious both were on the brink of collapse. Of course, Rimuru understood perfectly that each of them had their own reasons for being unable to fight at full strength. Rimuru then tried to rally everyone, only to realize that every single teammate was a problem in their own special way. And right at that moment, he noticed the ill-intentioned looks on Guy's and Velzard's faces. In this episode, Rimuru would formally face Veldanava. At least at first, however, the battle would be observed through the clash between Feldway and Veldanava, and thanks to an offhand remark from Diablo, he would experience what might have been the most mentally taxing stretch of his life. While the three primordial demons obtained the all-purpose slime cells, compared to Veldanava's sheer power, I personally felt this was the real highlight of the episode. So, let's get started. Rimuru saw the situation clearly. Everyone was already struggling just to deal with Ivarage. If Veldanava was added on top of that, the battle would be completely unwinnable. Expecting this group to calmly sit down and reach a consensus was nothing short of fantasy. Just as Rimuru was rubbing his temples, Velzard flashed a meaningful smile and asked him what he planned to do. Rimuru instantly went on alert. There was an unmistakable aura of, "We're dumping all responsibility on you," behind that smile. Fortunately, Velgrin changed the subject, expressing curiosity about why Velzard had chosen to stand on their side as well. The True Dragon Sisters then launched into an extremely self-centered conversation. Velzard said that as long as Guy was with her, she was satisfied. Not to be outdone, Velgrin replied that as long as Masayuki was there, she needed nothing else. Rimuru watched these sisters, whose entire worldview revolved around the men they loved. He felt a twinge of envy toward their unwavering survival philosophy, but he was far more pragmatic. In the end, the meaning of battle was victory. He had to find a way to win. Then, the worst thing happened. Guy addressed Rimuru in that skin-crawlingly ingratiating voice as Rimuru-kun. Rimuru knew from experience that nothing good ever followed being called Rimuru-kun. He immediately refused without even acknowledging it. Guy, of course, ignored him completely and unilaterally announced the revised plan. Guy would go deal with Ivarage, and Rimuru would stall Veldanava. Rimuru was stunned. Back in episode 149, Guy had clearly agreed to take on Veldanava himself, yet now he was suddenly changing his mind. Guy declared with full confidence that Rimuru was best at buying time. Rimuru tried to wriggle out of it, first by playing the exhaustion card, saying he was already worn out from fighting Milim earlier. Guy and Velzard instantly shut him down in unison, saying that was all in the past. Rimuru was speechless, because that past had literally happened moments ago. He then argued that awakening Velzard had exhausted him too, only for Guy to reply that Rimuru was just providing support, and that he had done the actual awakening. Cornered, Rimuru tried the ultimate corporate slave tactic, appealing to emotions. He claimed he was just an ordinary demon lord, and that the burden of fighting a creator god should fall to someone like Dino-san or Luminous Sama. The response was a merciless, unanimous rejection. Guy told him to stop talking nonsense and get moving. Dino was completely fixated on whether Rimuru would officially hire him after the battle and kept shouting about it. Pico and Gresha jumped in too, insisting they were far more capable than Dino and should also be hired. Luminous snapped irritably that being called Sama by Rimuru made her skin crawl. The scene descended into total chaos. Jokes aside, Guy finally dropped his playful tone and spoke seriously. He admitted that he had once lost to Veldanava. While he didn't know how much power Veldanava had recovered, Guy believed that fighting together would still yield a higher chance of victory. This rare moment of honesty left Rimuru with no choice but to nod in acceptance. And so, the final battle plan was set. Rimuru would engage Veldanava one-on-one and stall him. The sole objective was to buy time. Guy would move to eliminate Ivarage as quickly as possible. Once regrouped, everyone would launch a righteous gang-up on Veldanava. Rimuru was 100% unwilling, but he was forced into the role of main tank against the creator god. It wasn't just because he excelled at survival. He was the only one present, capable of even standing on the same conversational plane as that being. Although the plan was decided, the lack of intelligence was a fatal weakness. Rimuru chose to conceal news of Veldanava's revival from the regular troops to prevent panic. Guy charged toward Ivarage, while Rimuru stayed put, quietly calculating. First, he would wait for Veldanava to come down on his own. At least, that might buy a little time. Rimuru insisted this wasn't slacking off. It was strategy. The god, however, gave him no room to breathe. A figure suddenly appeared before Rimuru, not by flight, but by instant motion. Veldanava casually swung a hand toward Rimuru's neck. With Seal's last-second warning, Rimuru barely managed to evade. A delay of even 0.1 seconds would have cost him his head. Seal calmly remarked that even if half of his head had been severed, it would have been fine. Rimuru screamed internally that there was no way that was a fine. This was far beyond the realm of normal beings, though, admittedly, he wasn't exactly human anymore. Even if a slime couldn't truly die, Rimuru still retained human sensibilities and an instinctive aversion to pain. Just imagining phantom limb pain made him shudder. After evading that strike, Rimuru finally saw the true face of this god. His appearance was almost identical to Feldway's, but there were clear differences. Veldanava's pupils were golden, his jet-black long hair shimmered like a field of stars, and his presence carried an even more bewitching, overwhelming charisma. Veldanava looked at the Rimuru, who had slipped past his attack, and spoke a meaningful line, stating that Rimuru truly was this world's greatest singularity. Rimuru was completely baffled by that remark, but he still asked the core question, why did Veldanava want to destroy the world? Veldanava's answer was simple and cruel. He had judged every existence in this world to be a failed creation. The deeper reason, of course, was that he could not forgive the world that had taken away his beloved wife, Lucia. This was not merely a god's judgment, but the revenge of a husband who had lost his wife. Veldanava condensed his fighting aura into the shape of a blade, clearly preparing to fight in earnest. At that moment, Feldway, who had just been saved, stepped forward, sword in hand, positioning himself beside Rimuru. Feldway declared bravely that as a subordinate, it was his duty to stop his master's mistake. Rimuru cheered Feldway on frantically in his heart, thinking that Feldway was truly reliable when it mattered most. This was the perfect moment to repay the favor. Rimuru decided to have Feldway hold the front line while he supported and observed from the side. To prevent the shockwaves of the battle from destroying the land, Rimuru activated a skill and completely froze the surface of the ground. This was clearly Velzard's power. On the other side of the battlefield, Velzard seemed about to say something, but Rimuru chose to ignore her outright. In his mind, once Velzard's skill was analyzed, it would all become his anyway. Explaining it would just be troublesome. Pretending not to notice was the easiest solution. The battlefield was now split into two zones. One was the Ivarage front, where Guy, Milim, and Veldora were on the offensive, with Velzard and Velgrin providing backup. The other was the Veldanava front, where Feldway served as the main tank, while Rimuru controlled the field and provided support. Benimaru, Diablo, and Testarossa were also close by as powerful reinforcements, and Ultima was on her way. Even so, Rimuru remained extremely cautious. Against an opponent like Veldanava, whose information was almost non-existent, brute force alone would be meaningless. Rimuru intended to observe for a while longer, hoping Feldway might reveal something unexpected. The fight began, but this was not a battle. Rimuru was stunned by what he saw. He had expected Veldanava to be powerful, but witnessing it firsthand was something else entirely. Feldway wielded his Genesis-grade longsword arc, with existence points conservatively estimated in the tens of millions. He attacked with everything he had. Veldanava, however, did not even hold a physical weapon. He merely shaped his own aura into the form of a sword. Yet, the actual exchange was completely one-sided. Veldanava defended effortlessly from start to finish, utterly at ease. The scene looked less like a life-or-death struggle and more like a mentor patiently guiding a junior through practice. Rimuru sighed internally. The gap was so vast it inspired despair. Feldway's chance of victory was 0. Seeing this, Zelario wavered. As an angel who had once sworn loyalty to Veldanava, he was uncertain what he should do. Rimuru responded generously, saying that if Zelario wished to follow Veldanava, he would not stop him. Rimuru was not being naive. This was rational empathy. Ivarage's destruction was childish, senseless malice that had to be stopped. But Veldanava was different. He had personally witnessed his wife Lucia being killed, and his daughter Milim nearly dying. If Rimuru were in his place, if someone he loved were about to be taken from him, he could not guarantee he wouldn't fall into madness himself. This extreme or set to 0 solution was cruel, but logically understandable. Understanding it, however, did not mean agreeing with it. Rimuru compared this conflict between God and man to the relationship between humans and AI. If a self-aware robot created by humans rebelled against its creator, humans would find it absurd and would almost certainly suppress it. The creator would feel justified. The creation would feel rebellion was inevitable. Both sides had their logic. It was a deeply controversial issue to begin with. At that moment, Rimuru thought of Seal. She had once been merely a skill, yet now possessed a sense of self. Seal sensed Rimuru's thoughts and released a powerful emotional wave from deep within his core, declaring that to her, her master was everything. Rimuru's resolve solidified. As long as one truly lived, one would fight with all one's strength against injustice. That was his reason for fighting, for survival. Veldanava seemed to see through Rimuru's thoughts and presented Feldway with a tempting proposal. His plan was to let Ivarage destroy the world, then allow everything to begin anew. He said that he had originally intended to take Feldway, the other 7 angels of origin, and those he deemed useful, like Guy, to the new world. Feldway, he claimed, had no reason to oppose him for the sake of those incompetent and vulgar beings left behind. It was an enticing offer. Even so, Seal found such manipulative words coming from Veldanava dull. Rimuru also saw the paradox immediately. Even if Rimuru himself had been invited, it would have been hard to resist. But what about his friends and friends' friends, their loved ones? The web of relationships would extend endlessly, eventually involving everyone. Saving only a portion would leave behind infinite regret. The conclusion was clear. Either everyone wins or everyone loses. Compromise had no meaning here. Seal calmly stated that she would remain with Rimuru-sama until the very end, and added that she had already finished analyzing Veldanava's method of world creation, meaning they could handle whatever came next. Rimuru had no idea what analyzing a creator god's technique even meant, but as long as Seal was there, it would be fine. Feldway was deeply anxious, but after hesitating, he launched one final verbal appeal. He no longer spoke of humanity's survival, but approached the issue from Veldanava's perspective. Veldanava-sama had a beloved wife, Lucia, a cherished daughter, Milim, 3 siblings, and dear friends. All of them, without exception, loved this world. If Veldanava took it all away, he would surely regret it. The sincerity of Feldway's words made even Dino think this time it might work. But Veldanava's response shattered every illusion. He said he had already known regret at the very moment he lost Lucia. It was precisely because he had granted life free will that fools capable of stealing his most precious treasure had come into existence. His voice was filled with nothing but emptiness. He was no longer the creator who loved the world, but a revenger consumed by grief. In the end, this conflict could only be resolved by determining a victor. Rimuru knew this better than anyone. and he let out a quiet, melancholy sigh. As for the battle itself, it was a one-sided crushing. Feldway was blasted away by Veldanava's aura, a clear message of, "Don't get in the way." Yet, Feldway stood back up almost immediately. Even knowing he had no chance of victory, he continued to charge forward relentlessly. Rimuru couldn't help but admire Feldway's backbone. He hadn't expected Feldway to endure this much, but one thing for sure, his regeneration speed was astonishing. Diablo, on the other hand, looked thoroughly displeased, muttering bitterly that Feldway's toughness was entirely thanks to the noble flesh granted by Rimuru-sama. Reaching this level was only natural because of that. By flesh, of course, he meant the slime cells Rimuru-sama had used earlier when swallowing Feldway to heal him. That honor had once been Diablo's pride, and now it had been given to the person he hated most. Even now, Diablo was still seething about it. Unfortunately for Diablo, that line was overheard by Testarossa. As the primordial white, she instantly locked onto the key detail. That idiot Feldway had actually received Rimuru-sama's cells. The very next second, Testarossa put on an Oscar-worthy performance. Her body swayed, her balance faltered, and she looked as if she were about to collapse. Rimuru hurriedly reached out and caught her. Testarossa lifted her gaze and gave him a fragile, pitiful smile, saying that the earlier fighting might have left her with some lingering damage. Rimuru could tell, on some level, that she was acting. But faced with a beautiful woman looking this weak, he still fell for it. Or rather, he willingly fell for it. Even as Hinata stood nearby watching him, with a tired, exasperated expression, Rimuru could only think that he truly had no resistance when it came to beautiful women. Diablo looked like he was about to object, but Testarossa moved first. She politely asked whether Rimuru-sama could also grant her some blood and flesh. In plain terms, she wanted slime cells. Rimuru did not expect the cells to be anything miraculous, and Seal, ever considerate, immediately replied that she would simply prepare a special recovery potion. Testarossa's success triggered a chain reaction. Ultima immediately protested that this was unfair and declared that Rimuru-sama had to give her some as well. Faced with a demon who was usually ruthless, but now looked adorable and obedient, Rimuru once again had no defense. Since he had already given some to Testarossa, he smiled and agreed. Then came Carrera. This one could only be described as sitting bolt upright from a deathbed. She had been unconscious from total exhaustion and was being carried over by Esprit and Ajera. The moment she heard there was a reward, she snapped awake and demanded that Rimuru-sama absolutely not leave her out. Considering that she had been one of the MVPs of the battlefield and had fought through multiple brutal engagements, Rimuru felt the reward was more than justified. Seal, as a result, had to work overtime and prepare 3 batches of pseudo-special recovery potions infused with slime cells. The 3 girls received their potions and drank them down in one go, their excitement impossible to hide. Then, in perfect unison, they turned toward Diablo. This was, without exaggeration, the darkest moment of Diablo's life. Testarossa remarked that now Diablo had lost any right to brag. Ultima added fuel to the fire, saying how unfortunate that was. Carrera, meanwhile, was simply delighted, praising how amazing the potion was. As Rimuru watched his subordinates bicker and mock each other, while Feldway was still fighting desperately on the other side, he could only sigh, realizing that he himself had enabled all of this. Poor Feldway was reaching his limit, and Rimuru was just about to step in. At that moment, Zelario suddenly spoke up, stating that he truly could not betray Veldanava-sama. Diablo's killing intent flared instantly as he prepared to clean house, but Rimuru quickly stopped him and calmed him down. Rimuru's reasoning was clear. The fact that Zelario was honest about it meant he would not stab them in the back. It was an open, straightforward stance. Besides, Zelario had never been a core ally to begin with. Expecting him to defect had always been unrealistic. Obera dryly commented that it was exactly this stubborn streak that had allowed Feldway to manipulate Zelario in the past. Still, Zelario possessed the frank, warrior-like temperament of an honest fighter. In the end, he accepted Rimuru's minimum request. He would do nothing at all. Neither side. Honestly, as long as he did not interfere, that alone was a huge help. Before long, Feldway finally collapsed. Rimuru could not help but admire him. Thanks to the slime cells he had just been given, which granted limitless regeneration, Feldway had managed to hold out against a god for as long as he did. Rimuru had been observing their duel the entire time, and the more he watched, the more unsettled he became. Veldanava's swordsmanship surpassed even Hakuru and Ajera. Its core principle was the perfect integration of instant motion into physical technique. What appeared to be a simple sword swing was actually accompanied by instantaneous repositioning at the feet. This blend of illusion and reality was impossible to defend against on first encounter. Even Diablo admitted that if he faced it without prior knowledge, it would be extremely troublesome. This made Rimuru seriously question whether he could truly defeat Veldanava. Meanwhile, Seal displayed an almost mysterious level of confidence. Just as Rimuru's unease grew, she calmly stated that there was absolutely no problem. Rimuru could not help but complain internally that this kind of baseless reassurance only made him more nervous. Veldanava, it seemed, still needed some time to fully adapt to his body. Without hesitation, he revived Ivarage's 3 subordinates, Kakeashi, Habataki, and Suiemu. The very same top-tier cryptids that everyone had struggled so desperately to defeat were resurrected just like that, without explanation. Ultima and Carrera were especially furious, overwhelmed by the feeling that all of their hard-earned victories had been trampled. Once again, the course of the war shifted. All right, that was all for this video. In this episode, Feldway, as the leader of the 7 Angels of Origin, once he committed to a belief, his endurance and execution were genuinely formidable. One particularly interesting point was Veldanava referring to Rimuru as the singularity of this world. Rimuru and Seal's growth had long since surpassed what even Veldanava and the voice of the world could have imagined. Although Chloe did not have many opportunities to shine in Volume 23, looking back on it raises an intriguing question. Were Chloe's countless thousand-year loops all meant to culminate in Rimuru becoming this singularity? And was it Seal in this timeline who successfully guided Chloe into that cycle to complete the process? If so, that would form a perfect closed loop. This is absolutely worth a deeper discussion, and it is something we can properly analyze after completing the novel reviews. Of course, the biggest highlight of this episode was the brief but delightful scene of the 3 primordial demon beauties demanding slime cells. It perfectly showcased their distinct personalities. Testarossa's calculated scheming, Ultima's cute, shameless charm, and Carrera's exaggerated, straightforward reaction the moment she heard there was a reward. Naturally, even though the 3 of them mocked Diablo for losing his exclusive bragging rights, Diablo would absolutely make sure to teach them a lesson later. In our next episode, we would reach yet another major highlight of this volume, Guy finally revealing his true power and overwhelming the current Ivarage, along with the emergence of the 3rd god-level ultimate skill in the series. The next episode would be just as exciting. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support was greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.